Have you ever wondered why some people feel absolutely nothing on a night the whole world celebrates? Why the final seconds before midnight seem to shake the sky but not their chest? As if the fireworks erupt for everyone else while they sit inside a quiet room that has learned not to expect anything from the world. You see, others preparing countdowns, polishing resolutions, capturing perfect photos for a night meant to symbolize renewal, yet for you, it feels like just another evening. Another set of hours passing through your hands, unchanged and unlit. And deep down, you ask yourself in a whisper, you never say out loud, why doesn't this night move me the way it moves them? There's a strange loneliness that arrives when the world celebrates louder than you feel. Imagine someone standing at the kitchen sink as cheers explode outside, their hands wet with dishwater while everyone else raises glasses. Or someone who turns off their notifications not out of bitterness, but because the flood of Happy New Year messages feels like scripted noise rather than genuine connection. Or that moment when you scroll past celebration posts with the same detachment you'd scroll past a random Tuesday update, as if the world's excitement is written in a language your emotions no longer speak. This quiet detachment is often misunderstood. People think it means you're cold, antisocial, uninterested. But the truth is more complicated, more human. Neuroscience suggests that anticipation requires emotional memory. The brain releases dopamine when it recognizes a reward it has previously felt. But what happens when your past didn't teach your mind that New Year's Eve was special? When childhood gave no warmth to this date, the brain simply doesn't spark. Attachment theory even hints that children who grew up with inconsistent affection learn early not to attach meaning to big moments, because expecting magic often led to disappointment, so you grow older, carrying this subtle numbness that looks like indifference but is actually self-protection. A shield built from years where celebration felt unfamiliar or even unsafe. To you, December 31st feels no different than March 9th, not because your heart lacks depth, but because it learned depth in quieter places. And perhaps, in a way, you're not wrong to feel disconnected. Maybe you've sensed something others ignore, the idea that a date on a calendar cannot reset a life, cannot erase wounds, cannot suddenly ignite hope that hasn't been nurtured. Yet beneath that calm stillness, there is a deeper story waiting to be uncovered. Because the night that doesn't feel special often traces its roots back to a childhood that never learned what special was supposed to mean. Have you ever noticed how some memories feel like they were drained of colour long before you were old enough to understand why? You watch other people light up at celebrations, yet inside you there is a quiet emptiness, as if your heart never received the instruction manual for joy. This isn't something that suddenly appeared in adulthood. It began much earlier, in rooms where the calendar flipped, but the atmosphere never changed. In a childhood where magic had no place to land. Imagine a child sitting on the edge of a worn-out sofa while two adults fight in the background. Outside, distant fireworks echo like broken promises, but inside the home, the only thing exploding is tension. That child doesn't understand the meaning of New Year's Eve. They only understand that loud noises usually mean emotional danger. So they don't wait for midnight, they wait for silence. They wait for peace. And in that waiting, celebration becomes irrelevant. Survival becomes the only ritual they know. Then picture another child, quieter, softer, living in a home where celebrations simply didn't exist. Parents too tired from life, too consumed with stress, too emotionally numb themselves to create anything resembling tradition. No countdowns, no decorations, no warmth. Just another evening, identical to the last. For a child, repetition is instruction. When every special day feels ordinary, the brain learns a simple rule: don't expect anything different. Neuroscience even tells us that the anticipation of joy is built through repeated emotional reinforcement, but if the repetition never happened, the anticipation never forms. A garden without water does not forget how to bloom, it simply never learned. And then there's the child who once hoped, the one who put on a small paper party hat, waiting for someone to notice. But the night passed quietly, and so did the years. Attachment theory explains that children internalize the emotional patterns around them. Inconsistency teaches them to brace, not believe. Neglect teaches them to lower expectations until expecting nothing becomes the safest option. And slowly, celebration becomes a foreign language spoken by families who seem to live in a different world. These children grow up wearing masks made of calmness. Masks that say, it's just a day, even though beneath the surface lies a lifetime of unacknowledged disappointment. You don't feel excitement not because you lack emotion, but because emotion was never given a place to bloom on nights that were supposed to be magical. And when a child grows up never learning the meaning of a moment, the adult they become carries that same quiet emptiness into every New Year's Eve that follows. Have you ever wondered how effortlessly you can pretend that tonight is nothing special? How naturally you slip into a calm, steady exterior while the world around you trembles with countdowns and glitter? It's almost strange the way you sit there with an expression that could belong to any ordinary evening, as if the air isn't vibrating with pressure, noise, and the collective hope of millions. People look at your quietness and assume you're simply not interested. But deep down, you know it isn't disinterest, it's conditioning. It's the adulthood built on the childhood that taught you not to expect magic. You move through New Year's Eve like someone walking through a museum of glass, careful not to touch anything that might shatter. You avoid the forced hype, the crowded rooms, the countdown chants that feel strangely hollow. You prefer routine, the same cup of tea, the same corner of your room, the same rhythm your heart feels safe in. While others chase the illusion of reinvention, you stay grounded, not because you lack dreams, but because you learned long ago that change doesn't follow a calendar. Neuroscience calls this emotional habituation, the brain's way of neutralizing moments it was never taught to celebrate. In other words, your emotional system simply does not light up where others do. And so you wear a mask, a calm, rational, adult mask that fits a little too comfortably, a mask that says, I'm fine, even as a quiet shadow inside you whispers, I never learned to feel what they're feeling. You tell yourself you're being practical, mature, composed, yet beneath that armor lies an older truth. Excitement feels dangerous when your earliest joys were unpredictable, inconsistent, or non-existent. Your emotional reflex is to step back rather than lean in, to protect yourself rather than hope. You don't hate celebration. You don't resent people who feel joy. In fact, sometimes you watch them with a softness you'll never admit, a small ache in your chest as they cheer, kiss, embrace, and declare resolutions with wide, hopeful eyes. Part of you wishes you could feel that too, without the numbness, without the skepticism, without the heaviness that comes from expecting nothing so you won't be disappointed. But this detachment is not a flaw. It's a map, a blueprint of how your inner world was built, brick by brick, from the earliest moments of your life. And every mask you wear now, every quiet step you take away from celebration, has a psychological logic behind it, one that traces all the way back to how your brain learned to survive. Because beneath this calm face, beneath this practiced neutrality, lies a deeper story, that science explains more clearly than emotion ever could. Have you ever noticed how strange it feels when everyone around you lights up at the mention of a special day, yet your own mind remains still, untouched, almost eerily calm? It's as if something inside you refuses to rise with the moment, like a lake that no amount of wind can ripple. And while people might assume you're detached or uninterested, the truth is far more complex and far more human. Your brain, in many ways, is simply following the blueprint it learned long ago. Neuroscience calls it low emotional reactivity, a pattern often rooted in early environments where big moments didn't carry emotional weight. When a child grows up without celebrations, without consistent joy, without rituals that reinforce meaning, the brain doesn't develop the neural pathways that fire with anticipation. Imagine a garden that was never watered. It doesn't reject sunlight. It just never learned how to bloom under it. Studies on dopamine anticipation reveal that the brain releases pleasure chemicals not during the event, but before it. But that release only happens when past experience taught the brain to expect something delightful. If your childhood offered disappointment more often than delight, your brain learned a quieter strategy. Don't hope, don't react, don't rise too high. It learned protection through emotional neutrality. Each unmet expectation, each uncelebrated milestone, quietly rewired your reward circuits to stay small, stay safe, stay unseen. Attachment theory adds another layer. Children raised in inconsistent or emotionally distant homes develop internal, emotional regulators that avoid spikes, whether joyful or painful. It's the mind's way of keeping you balanced when life around you never was. Even existential psychology whispers the same truth. Meaning isn't found in dates, it's formed in patterns. And if your patterns were marked by survival rather than celebration, your inner world simply doesn't vibrate on the same frequency as society's rituals. So when New Year's Eve arrives and the world shakes with countdowns, your brain remains steady, not broken, not numb, just trained by years of unreinforced experience. A study on emotional habituation found that people exposed repeatedly to flat or negative environments develop muted responses to symbolic events. The brain isn't refusing to feel, it's remembering how dangerous it once was to expect too much. And this creates a silent paradox inside you. On the outside, you appear calm, collected, unfazed. But on the inside, your brain carries the entire history of moments that were supposed to matter, but never did. The fireworks outside sound like memory echoes, and your inner world simply does what it has always done, stays quiet to stay safe. But safety always has a cost, and that cost becomes clearer when you look at the darker, more hidden side of this emotional stillness. Have you ever tried to convince yourself that a night means nothing, only to feel a quiet heaviness settle in your chest anyway? It's strange how silence can grow louder on a night when the world is shouting with joy. You tell yourself you don't care, that you're immune to the noise, but somewhere beneath the calm surface, something trembles, something small, something tired, something you learned to bury long ago. There is a certain loneliness that doesn't look like sadness from the outside. It looks like scrolling, like tidying up, like washing the last cup in the sink while fireworks crack open the sky. It looks like someone who seems indifferent, but inside there is a faint ache watching others celebrate the hope they no longer trust. You might even catch yourself glancing at a window for a second too long, watching the glow of distant celebrations, not because you want to join them, but because a part of you wonders what it would have been like to genuinely feel that excitement. The truth is, your indifference is not empty, it's protective. Neuroscientists call it emotional fatigue. a state where the heart has been disappointed enough times that it unconsciously shields itself from anything that might demand vulnerability. Attachment theory echoes the same idea. People who grew up expecting inconsistency learn to disconnect before the hurt arrives. And New Year's Eve, with its bright promises and bold declarations, becomes one of those nights you quietly step away from. But the darker side is this: the night itself becomes a mirror. The ticking clock feels less like time passing and more like time judging the fireworks outside. Don't symbolize hope. They mark another year you survived rather than lived, another cycle of holding yourself together, another reminder of everything you didn't feel, didn't say, didn't allow. It is a haunting kind of reflection, the kind you don't choose but cannot escape, so you pretend. You pretend it's just another night, because pretending feels safer than confronting the shadow that rises with the countdown. Pretending keeps you from acknowledging the fear of disappointment, of emptiness, of wishing for something that never arrives. And paradoxically, the more you act like the night doesn't matter, the more the inner shadow grows, feeding on all the emotions you refuse to name. This is the hidden weight carried by people who seem indifferent, a weight so private that even they rarely speak of it. Yet the world doesn't see this complexity. Society looks at your calm face and assumes coldness, detachment, or pessimism. And this is where the mislabeling begins, a misunderstanding that shapes the way you're seen by the world, that celebrates without noticing who stays in the quiet corners. Have you ever felt the strange suffocation that comes from a night everyone else seems to worship? It's almost unsettling how society decides, collectively and loudly, that this date, this one night, is supposed to mean something enormous. You're told to feel thrilled, hopeful, reborn. And if you don't, people look at you as if you're missing a fundamental part of the human experience. It's a subtle kind of exile, not from a place, but from an emotion you never felt welcome inside. Everywhere you look, the world performs excitement, like a ritual. Countdowns echo through crowded rooms, champagne glasses clink in carefully staged moments, and social media bursts with glittering illusions of joy, curated smiles, perfect angles, captions about new beginnings. You see these images, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel the quiet sting of alienation. It's as if you're watching humanity from behind a glass wall, unable to match their ecstatic rhythm. For people who are introverted, emotionally guarded, or spiritually drawn towards stillness rather than spectacle, New Year's Eve becomes a spotlight they never asked to stand beneath. Society has built myths around this night, myths that sound harmless on the surface but carry sharp edges. If you don't celebrate, something is wrong with you. New Year's Eve is about big emotions. You must feel excited because everyone else does. These beliefs turn celebration into a performance, a test of emotional conformity. And when you can't act the part, you quietly withdraw deeper into yourself, convinced that your difference is a flaw rather than an imprint of your past. Psychologists speak about social emotional contagion, the way people absorb collective moods. But some minds don't absorb, they resist, especially those shaped by environments where authenticity mattered more than appearances, or where excitement felt unsafe, unpredictable, or exhausting. When the world demands emotional fireworks, you instinctively reach for the mask of neutrality, not because you don't feel anything, but because the pressure to feel makes the feeling disappear completely. Perhaps the real issue isn't your lack of excitement at all. Perhaps it's society's discomfort with quiet souls. A culture terrified of silence will always try to drown it out with celebrations. A world afraid of introspection will always push you toward noise. Maybe that's why New Year's Eve is glorified so intensely it distracts everyone from the unsettling truth that change cannot be summoned by counting down from 10, and happiness cannot be forced into existence on command. Yet no matter how calmly you step away from the noise, ignoring the night does not erase what it stirs inside you. Because even in the silence, you choose. There are consequences, emotional echoes that eventually return, asking to be heard. Have you ever felt time slipping by so quietly that it almost startles you when you finally notice? There's a strange ache that comes from watching the calendar change while feeling nothing shift inside you. It's as if life is drifting gently down a river and you're standing on the bank, watching it pass without ever stepping in. This is the silent burden carried by those who treat New Year's Eve like a normal day, not out of rebellion, but because something in them learned long ago that expectations only lead to disappointment. As the world counts down, you don't feel the thrill of renewal. You feel distance, a separation between your inner world and the celebrations around you. People talk about fresh starts and new beginnings, but to you, these phrases feel like decorations stuck on top of deeper truths. You've lived enough years to know that change does not arrive when the clock strikes 12. And over time, this realism, or maybe this caution, becomes something heavier. It becomes a quiet numbness that settles across your emotional landscape like fog. There are moments when you watch others create rituals, lighting candles, writing resolutions, holding each other tightly, and a small, almost imperceptible loneliness rises in your chest. Not the dramatic kind, but the soft kind you swallow before anyone notices. Neuroscientists describe this as emotional disconnection, a state where repeated suppression causes your brain to mute its own responses. You begin to lose the ability to form rituals, not because you don't want them, but because your emotional wiring never learned how to sustain them. The years begin to blur. One birthday blends into the next. One December folds silently into another. And while everyone else celebrates another year lived, you feel like a spectator, watching a movie about your own life, rather than participating in it. Attachment theory explains that individuals who grew up emotionally unsupported often develop a subtle fear of change, because change feels unpredictable, and unpredictability once meant pain. So when the world celebrates transformation, you instinctively step back, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. Yet there is an internal split, a quiet conflict you rarely admit. A part of you longs to feel something, anything, to be moved by a moment the way others seem to be, to feel the spark you've watched from afar for so many years. But another part stands guard, whispering reminders of past disappointments, holding you back from vulnerability like a shadow protecting the wound it was born to cover. And so the years pass, silently, safely, but not without cost. Because healing, as you'll soon realize, does not come from fireworks or countdowns, it comes from the honesty you've been avoiding all along. Have you ever wondered why you feel pressured to change in the same moment everyone else does? Why the world seems to assume that healing must arrive on a deadline, wrapped in fireworks and loud promises? Maybe the truth is simpler, gentler, and far more human. You don't have to feel what everyone else feels to begin again. Renewal was never meant to be performed. It was meant to be lived quietly in moments that belong to you. Imagine, for a second, stepping away from the noise, not out of avoidance, but out of choice. Picture yourself sitting in a dimly lit room, not trying to force excitement, not trying to summon hope, simply allowing yourself to breathe without pretending. In that quiet, something shifts. Not dramatically, not like the cinematic scenes people post on social media, but in a subtle, steady way your nervous system can actually hold. Neuroscientists say that emotional change happens through repetition of small, meaningful experiences, not sudden, overwhelming resolutions. Like watering a garden, one cup at a time, instead of expecting a downpour to bring it to life. Healing for you might start with redefining what a ritual even means. Instead of joining the world's countdown, you create your own. Maybe it's writing a single, honest sentence about the year you've lived. Maybe it's cleaning a corner of your room because it helps you reclaim a sense of control. Maybe it's taking a slow walk under the night sky while everyone else is cheering, letting the air remind you that you're still here, still evolving in ways no one else can see. These are rituals too softer, quieter, but no less meaningful. Attachment theory teaches that people who grew up without emotional consistency need rituals that feel safe, predictable, and pressure-free. So you let joy come in small forms. A warm drink, a gentle playlist, a moment of gratitude that isn't forced. You build emotional associations slowly, allowing your brain to learn that some moments can be special without being overwhelming. And slowly, your inner world begins to uncurl from years of withdrawal, the way neglected plants cautiously reach for light again. You don't need to love New Year's Eve to reclaim your life. You don't need to celebrate loudly to move forward. You simply need to give yourself permission to feel, in your own timing, at your own depth, without comparison. Healing was never supposed to be spectacular. It was supposed to be honest. And honesty, when embraced fully, leads you towards something even deeper, the quiet philosophical truth that renewal does not live in dates or rituals, but in the courage to meet yourself where you actually are. Have you ever noticed how quietly a real change begins? Not with fireworks, not with countdowns, not with the world chanting numbers as if time itself can be commanded into transformation, but with a single, private moment when something inside you finally whispers, enough. It's almost ironic how society convinces you that renewal must arrive on a precise date, as if your inner world operates on the same schedule as a calendar. Yet the truth is gentler, slower, and far more personal. The real new year begins not when the clock resets, but when you do. Think of the times in your life when you've changed without anyone noticing. A childhood moment when you realized you had to protect yourself. A teenage night when you decided to stop expecting too much. An adult morning when you told yourself you didn't need to feel excitement just because everyone else did. These turning points didn't wait for January. They happened the way all meaningful shifts do, quietly, internally, without applause. Neuroscientists call these moments identity micro-shifts, subtle rewrites of your inner narrative that happen when your mind finally accepts a truth it had been avoiding. And perhaps now, as you sit in a room that feels too still while the world outside celebrates loudly, another shift is beginning. A softer one, a more honest one. You're starting to see that your indifference to New Year's Eve was never a flaw. It was a reflection of wounds that were never acknowledged, expectations that were never met, and emotional landscapes that were never nurtured. But awareness has a way of softening even the hardest shadows. Once you understand why you disconnect, the distance begins to lose its power over you. You might still feel like a spectator at times, watching others celebrate with a fullness you've never felt. But now, instead of judging yourself for it, you begin to realize that your journey doesn't need to match theirs. Healing for you won't come through resolutions shouted into the night. It will come from smaller, quieter acts of courage, telling the truth about what hurt you, allowing yourself to feel again at your own pace, reclaiming meaning not because the world tells you to, but because you decide you deserve it. And when that decision finally settles in your heart, something profound happens. Time stops being something that controls you and becomes something you can grow within. You stop waiting for a date to change you and start realizing that the power was always inside you. For some people, January 1st is just a date, but healing begins the moment the heart decides it deserves a new beginning. And when that moment arrives, that, for you, is the real new year.